Have you ever loved someone who keeps pulling away the moment things get close? What if I told you the more calm you become, the more they actually start to fall for you? You don't need to chase them. You need to shift your energy, because when you stop invading their space and start expanding your peace, that's when their walls begin to crumble. Stay with me. I'm about to show you why the avoidant falls hardest for the one who doesn't chase. We'll explain everything in this video, step by step. Don't skip it. You ever notice how some people crave closeness and others seem to run the moment you get too close? You give, they pull away. You reach out, they retreat. And deep down you start to wonder, do they even care? But here's the truth most people don't see, and the avoidant doesn't run because they don't feel, they run because they feel too much. See, every avoidant has built an emotional fortress, a wall that says, don't get too close, I might lose control, don't love me too deeply, I don't know if I can survive that kind of pain again. It's not that they don't want love. They just learn to fear what it can take away. Now here's where the magic happens. When you push the right boundary, not by chasing, not by begging, but by standing in your power, something shifts. You show them a love that doesn't demand, a presence that doesn't pressure. You become the calm in their storm instead of the storm that triggers their fear. And in that calm, they start to feel safe. They start to trust that love doesn't have to suffocate them. They start to realize that closeness doesn't mean loss. You see, love isn't about breaking someone's walls. It's about making the space inside the walls so warm, so safe, that the walls begin to melt on their own. And that's what pushing the boundary really means. It's not crossing into their fear. It's expanding the space of your own strength. It's showing them that connection can exist without control. That love can breathe. And that's when the avoidant falls, not because you forced it, but because for the first time in their life, they feel seen, not trapped, understood, not judged, and free, yet connected. That's when the chase ends and real love begins. So if you're dealing with someone who pulls away, don't panic. Don't chase. Instead, expand your emotional gravity. Stay centered, stay whole, stay calm. Because when you do, and that's when they feel something they've never felt before, safety and love. And that is when the avoidant falls. Not when you push for closeness, but when you push the boundary of your own strength, patience, and emotional freedom. That's when love stops being a game of distance and becomes a dance of connection. And true connection begins when you stop chasing and start standing in your emotional power. There's a moment in every relationship where one person starts to lean in and the other begins to pull back. It's instinctive, almost primal, as if their nervous system has decided that love is both the thing they crave and the thing they fear most. And in that dynamic, the one who feels love deeply often makes a critical mistake. They start chasing what feels like it's slipping away. They try harder, give more, explain more, text more, love more, as if their effort could somehow close the gap that fear has created. But the harder you chase, the faster the other person runs, because love isn't meant to be pursued from a place of scarcity or desperation. Love expands only when it's rooted in strength, certainty, and grounded presence. When you chase, you're subconsciously communicating something powerful, that the other person's approval, attention, or affection defines your worth. You might not say it aloud, but energetically it's felt. And the avoidant, someone who's hyper, attuned to any hint of emotional demand, senses that pressure immediately. To them, closeness feels like control, attention feels like expectation, and vulnerability feels like danger. So when you chase, you unintentionally confirm their deepest fear, that love will consume them, that they'll lose autonomy, that they'll disappoint or be trapped. The moment you step into emotional pursuit, you stop being a source of safety and become a source of anxiety. Standing in your emotional power changes that entire dynamic. It means you stop needing to be chosen and start remembering that you are already enough. It means your presence becomes calm, grounded, certain. You no longer reach from emptiness, but from fullness. Instead of reacting to their withdrawal, you respond with patience and inner clarity. You stop personalizing their distance. You understand that their patterns are not a rejection of your worth, but a reflection of their wiring. And from that state of strength, you create an emotional contrast so powerful that the avoidant begins to feel something they've never felt before. Safety without pressure, connection without control. When you stand in your emotional power, you reclaim your energy. You stop letting their inconsistency dictate your peace. You no longer play the emotional tug of war that drains both of you. Instead, you anchor yourself in authenticity. You stop asking, why aren't they giving me what I need? And start asking, am I giving myself what I need? Because the truth is, no relationship can thrive when it's built on one person's pursuit of another's validation. When you fill your own emotional cup, you shift from chasing to attracting. You become the energy that draws love in, not the one that tries to capture it. There's something magnetic about a person who is calm in the face of emotional uncertainty. Someone who can love deeply without needing to control the outcome. Someone who says, I'm here, but I'm also whole on my own. That's emotional power. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it doesn't beg. It simply exists in certainty. And certainty is the most attractive energy in the world, especially to someone who's used to chaos, control, or emotional instability. When you stop chasing, the avoidance system begins to relax. Their nervous system, which once equated closeness with danger, starts to reinterpret connection as safety. They start to realize you're not a threat to their freedom. You're a partner in it. They begin to approach on their own, not because you force them, but because your energy no longer triggers their defenses. The dance of push and pull turns into a rhythm of mutual respect and curiosity. But this transformation doesn't happen when you're still attached to outcomes. It happens when you embody presence without pressure, strength without struggle. Standing in your emotional power doesn't mean being detached or cold. It doesn't mean playing games or pretending you don't care. It means caring deeply while remaining grounded in your own worth. It's the ability to hold emotional space for another person's fear without losing yourself in it. When you can say, I understand you're scared and I'm not here to fix or chase you. I'm here to be steady, to be real, and to be true. You create an emotional frequency that's irresistible. You're no longer trying to convince anyone to love you. You're allowing love to rise naturally from the soil of self, respect. And that's where true connection is born, from strength, not scarcity. When two people come together, not because one is trying to fill a void in the other, but because both are already standing tall, love becomes a celebration rather than a transaction. The avoidant begins to associate your presence with peace rather than pressure. They start to trust that you won't collapse under their silence, won't chase them into retreat, won't force them to feel what they're not ready to feel. That trust is the beginning of real intimacy. It's ironic, isn't it? The moment you stop trying to hold on is the moment things start to hold together. The moment you stop demanding love is the moment it starts to flow naturally. Because love doesn't respond to control, it responds to energy, it responds to wholeness, to groundedness, to calm strength. The more you stand in your emotional power, the more magnetic you become, not just to the avoidant, but to anyone around you. People feel drawn to someone who doesn't need to prove their worth. They feel safe with someone who can handle distance without panic. They feel seen by someone who listens with compassion rather than fear. This isn't just about relationships. It's about your relationship with yourself. Chasing is born from the illusion that something out there will complete you. Standing in power is born from the realization that you are already complete. When you live from that place, every interaction changes. And you stop needing people to behave a certain way for you to feel okay. You stop living in emotional reaction and start living in conscious response. That's where your peace comes from. That's where your magnetism grows. The paradox of love is that the less you chase it, the more it finds you. Because when you stop chasing, you're no longer operating from fear. You're operating from truth. And truth doesn't need to be pursued. It attracts. The avoidant begins to sense that truth, They feel drawn to it, not because you're perfect, but because your energy no longer threatens their freedom. You've created space, not pressure, openness, not demand. And in that space, connection becomes possible. So when you find yourself tempted to chase, pause, breathe, return to yourself. Remember that your power isn't found in how hard you try to be loved. It's found in how deeply you embody love itself. When you live from that space, you stop reaching for what's running away and you start radiating the kind of energy that draws everything meant for you closer. The avoidant doesn't fear love. They fear losing themselves in it. That's the truth that most people never see beneath the surface. On the outside, the avoidant looks calm, detached, maybe even indifferent. They act like they don't need anyone, as if closeness is optional and independence is everything. But inside, there's a storm of emotion that they've learned to bury so deep it almost feels invisible. They've been conditioned, sometimes through years of emotional neglect or unpredictable love, to believe that closeness equals pain, that attachment leads to loss. That vulnerability opens the door to rejection. So they learn to survive by creating distance, by controlling the amount of emotional exposure they allow. Not because they don't care, but because caring too much once cost them more than they could handle. The avoidance fear isn't about love itself. They crave it like anyone else. They dream of being seen, understood, held without judgment. But that dream feels dangerous. When love starts to get real, when emotions deepen, when connection feels too intense, it activates an old memory, the feeling of being trapped, smothered, or abandoned. It's as if their nervous system starts screaming, danger! You're losing control. So they withdraw, not to punish or manipulate, but to protect. They step back to regulate their sense of safety, to find themselves again inside a connection that feels overwhelming. This is why when you get closer, they step back. When you give space, they move closer again. And they're not playing games. They're trying to find balance between intimacy and autonomy. Understanding this changes everything because most people interpret their withdrawal as rejection. They take it personally, thinking, if they really loved me, they wouldn't pull away. But love for the avoidant isn't the absence of fear. It's the space where fear and desire collide. They love, but they fear what love will demand of them. They want to be close, but they're terrified that closeness will consume them. Their entire life, they've built identity through independence, through control. Love threatens that identity because it requires surrender, vulnerability, uncertainty. To an avoidant, those things don't feel romantic, they feel unsafe. When you start to see their patterns not as resistance, but as protection, your perspective shifts. You stop reacting to their distance with panic. You stop trying to force closeness. Instead, you learn to meet their fear with understanding. You stop chasing and start creating emotional safety. Because the more you pressure them to connect, the more you validate their belief that love is dangerous. But when you hold steady, when you show consistency without demand, you begin to rewrite their emotional programming. They start to experience connection not as a threat, but as something that allows them to stay themselves. That's the key to helping an avoidant open their heart. Not through pursuit, but through presence. The avoidance fear of losing themselves runs deep because at some point they did. Maybe as children they had to suppress emotions to be accepted. Maybe they learned that love came with conditions, that their needs were too much, that independence was the only way to stay safe. So they built walls to keep from depending on anyone again. But those walls don't just keep pain out, they keep love out too. And the tragedy is that many avoidants spend their lives craving the very thing they're protecting themselves from. They long for intimacy, but they only know how to survive by maintaining distance. That's why when someone shows them consistent care without pressure, it disarms them. It's unfamiliar, but it feels good. It feels like safety without loss. To love an avoidant is to understand their paradox. You have to see that their avoidance isn't rejection. It's regulation. You can't meet their withdrawal with judgment or panic. You meet it with steadiness, with patience, with your own emotional grounding. Because if you start chasing them, you become the thing they fear. they start to feel like they're being pulled into a vortex that will strip them of control. But when you stay calm and grounded, they begin to feel something new. Trust. And trust is what allows the avoidant to take their first real emotional risk. It's what helps them realize that love doesn't mean losing themselves. It can mean finding themselves within connection. When you stay true to your emotional power, you're showing them that love doesn't have to be consuming. You show them that it's possible to connect deeply while maintaining individuality. This balance is what they've never known. To them, and love has always meant sacrifice, sacrificing peace, independence, or safety. But when you demonstrate that love can coexist with freedom, their heart begins to open in ways they never thought possible. You don't do this by talking them into it, but by embodying it. You communicate through energy, not persuasion. Your calm presence says, you're safe with me, and you don't have to disappear to be loved. The avoidance healing begins not when someone tears down their walls, but when someone proves that those walls aren't needed anymore. When they experience love that doesn't demand constant reassurance, when they feel seen without being smothered, when they realize they can express without being controlled, something fundamental shifts inside them. They start to trust not just you, but love itself. And when they begin to trust love, they start to trust themselves within it. That's when real connection begins to form. Not the kind that's built on chasing or convincing, but the kind built on mutual safety and self-awareness. Every time you respond to their distance with understanding rather than desperation, you help them rewrite a lifetime of emotional programming. You show them that connection can be safe. You prove that love doesn't have to mean self-abandonment. You help them integrate closeness and independence instead of choosing one over the other. This is how an avoidant begins to transform, not through confrontation, but through consistency, through emotional steadiness, through someone who can love them without losing themselves. Either to understand the avoidant is to master patience. It's knowing that love with them is a slow unfolding, not a sudden explosion. It's learning that progress isn't measured by how close they get to you, but by how safe they feel being themselves around you. Sometimes love means allowing space without resentment. Sometimes it means being okay with silence. Sometimes it's understanding that their distance isn't proof of apathy. It's proof of inner conflict. They want to love you, but they're terrified that loving you will cost them their freedom, their identity, their peace. But as you continue to stand strong in who you are, they slowly realize that love doesn't take. There's incredible beauty in that realization. Because once the avoidant understands that love doesn't demand the loss of self, their heart begins to trust in ways it never could before. They start to approach instead of withdraw. They begin to open up without fear of being consumed. They learn that real intimacy isn't the merging of two people into one. It's two whole individuals meeting in mutual freedom and emotional truth. That's what allows love to deepen. That's when the avoidant stops fearing connection and starts embracing it. Because for the first time, they're not choosing between love and self. They're discovering both at once. Safety, not pressure, is what melts emotional walls. Every person who has learned to protect themselves emotionally has done so for a reason. No one wakes up one day and decides to shut off their heart. It happens slowly through experiences that teach them that vulnerability leads to pain, that openness leads to loss, that letting someone in means giving someone the power to hurt them. So they build walls, not because they want to be alone, but because they want to feel safe. They convince themselves that distance is strength, that control is protection, and that needing no one is freedom. But underneath all of that, there's still a heart that wants to be understood, to be loved without fear, to be seen without judgment. That heart doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to safety. When you pressure someone emotionally, even if your intentions are loving, what you're really doing is activating their defense system. Pressure says, prove your love. Respond to my needs. Close the gap now. To someone who's been hurt, that feels like danger. It feels like the beginning of losing control again. They might not even understand why they're pulling away. They just feel the tension in their body, the instinct to retreat, to create space where they can breathe again. This is why love that's rushed often fails, and not because the feelings aren't real, but because the nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to hold them. Love can only grow where there is emotional room to breathe safety. On the other hand, communicates something completely different. It says, you don't have to rush. You don't have to prove. You don't have to perform. You're safe to be as you are. That kind of energy doesn't trigger defenses. It disarms them. Safety allows walls to come down naturally because it replaces fear with trust. When someone feels safe with you, they stop analyzing your every move for hidden motives. They stop preparing for disappointment. They start to relax into the connection. And that relaxation is what allows love to actually reach them, because love isn't received through force. It's received through permission. Creating emotional safety requires patience, awareness, and a deep understanding of human fear. It's about giving the other person space to feel what they feel without judgment. It's about not reacting from your own insecurity when they need distance. It's about showing consistency even when the relationship feels uncertain. Every time you choose understanding over control, you're building trust. Every time you respond to their withdrawal with calm instead of panic, you're teaching them that love doesn't always mean chaos. Every time you stay grounded instead of matching their fear, you're proving that connection can exist without pain. That's the kind of safety that changes people from the inside out. The avoidant, in particular, needs this kind of safety. They've spent their whole life associating closeness with danger. Maybe they grew up in environments where love was conditional, where emotions were ignored or invalidated, where being vulnerable meant being disappointed. So now as adults, they protect their emotional independence like their life depends on it. When someone tries to get close, it triggers all those old alarms. But when they meet someone who offers connection without control, it confuses their system in the best way. Their mind expects to be cornered, but instead, and they feel seen. Their heart expects to be suffocated, but instead, they feel free. That's when the walls start to melt. Safety doesn't mean silence or avoidance of truth. It means communication that honors the other person's emotional reality. You can still express needs, boundaries, and desires, but the difference is in the energy behind them. Pressure says, I need you to do this for me so I can feel okay. Safety says, this is how I feel, and I trust you to meet me where you can. The first comes from fear, and the second from faith. When love is communicated through faith, it doesn't create anxiety, it creates space. And in that space, connection grows stronger because both people feel they can be themselves without losing the other. When someone feels safe, they open up naturally. They share more, reveal more, let their guard down without even realizing it. It's not about convincing them to open. It's about creating an emotional climate where opening feels natural. Safety is what gives the avoidant the courage to lean in instead of run away. It's what allows them to begin trusting not only you, but also their own capacity to love. They start to realize that they can let someone close and still keep their identity intact. They can love without losing control. They can be vulnerable and still be safe. That realization changes everything because it begins to undo years of emotional conditioning. Pressure, however, destroys that process. When you push too hard, demand too much, or interpret their distance as rejection, you feed their fear. You confirm their internal belief that closeness equals danger. You become another person they have to protect themselves from. This is why chasing an avoidant always backfires. It's not that they don't care. It's that your pursuit activates their survival instinct. They can't feel love when they're in defense mode. But when you stay calm, when you keep your energy grounded, when you let them come to you in their own time, they begin to feel something they rarely feel in relationships: peace. That peace is what allows love to flow freely. Safety isn't passive, it's active. It's choosing to respond differently than what their past expects. It's holding compassion when fear would normally take over, and it's maintaining stability when they test the connection with distance or silence. It's proving again and again that you're not a threat to their autonomy. When someone like that realizes they can walk away and still be welcomed back without punishment, they begin to trust deeply. They start to believe that love doesn't have to be an all or nothing experience. It can be something that grows slowly, steadily, without fear of collapse. When you become a source of emotional safety, you become magnetic. People are drawn to those who make them feel free to be themselves. The avoidant, especially, is drawn to people who don't demand, who don't chase, who don't lose themselves trying to hold on. They are drawn to peace. And when you are peace, you become irresistible. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because your energy says, you're safe here. You're free here. That is the highest form of love, not control, not possession, but safety. To build safety, you must also feel safe within yourself. You can't give calm energy if you're constantly waiting for the other person to validate you. You can't create peace if you're filled with fear. You have to be rooted in your own worth so deeply that their distance doesn't shake you. That's how you communicate safety, not through words, but through energy. When your energy is stable, people feel it. The avoidant feels it, and slowly they begin to trust it. That trust is what invites them to stay, to open, and to love. The irony of emotional safety is that it often requires you to let go of control completely. You can't force it. You can't demand it. You can only embody it. You show it through your actions, your tone, your patience. You demonstrate it by staying open when things get uncomfortable. You build it one moment at a time through presence, through consistency, through kindness that doesn't demand repayment. That's how you melt walls, not by tearing them down, but by being the warmth that makes them unnecessary. Because in the end, love that lasts isn't the one that pushes the hardest. It's the one that makes the heart feel safest. To stay pushing the boundary means expanding your calm, not invading their space. In relationships, especially with someone who tends to withdraw or avoid intimacy, the instinct is often to do the opposite. When they pull away, you want to move closer. When they go silent, you want to fill the silence. When they seem emotionally distant, you want to bridge the gap by doing more, giving more, explaining more. But all of that movement outward, all of that chasing energy often makes them retreat even further. Because what you perceive as connection, they experience as pressure. What you see as love, they interpret as intrusion. They don't need you to step into their space. They need to expand yours. They need to feel that your energy is calm enough, grounded enough, and stable enough to hold both their distance and your desire for closeness at the same time. Expanding your calm means learning to hold emotional tension without trying to resolve it instantly. It's the ability to stay centered when someone else's fear or avoidance shows up. Most people react to emotional withdrawal with anxiety. They want to fix it because the gap between them feels uncomfortable. That discomfort pushes them to act impulsively, to call, to explain, to demand reassurance. But real strength in relationships comes from your capacity to stay steady when things feel uncertain. When you can breathe in that gap instead of filling it, you create space for the other person to regulate their own emotions. You show that your sense of peace doesn't depend on their immediate response. And in doing so, you become a grounding force rather than another source of pressure for the avoidant. That calm energy is everything. Their nervous system is always on alert for signs of emotional control or dependency. They can feel it even when you say the right words. If your tone, your energy, or your urgency says, I need you to make me feel okay, their instinct will be to retreat. But if your energy says, I'm okay whether you're close or far, they begin to relax. They stop defending themselves because they realize they're not being emotionally cornered. This is what pushing the boundary really means. It's pushing your own emotional capacity, not theirs. It's expanding your ability to hold love without fear, to remain compassionate without control, to stay emotionally open even when things aren't going your way. This requires deep self-awareness because the urge to chase or fix isn't just about them. It's about your own discomfort with uncertainty. It's about your need for control in situations where love feels unpredictable. But love was never meant to be controlled. It's meant to be experienced, to be allowed, to be grown through presence. When you expand your calm, you're teaching your nervous system to trust love again. You're rewiring your own patterns from reaction to response. You stop treating connection like a transaction and start experiencing it as energy exchange. You stop trying to take from the moment and start learning to hold it. Calmness is not passivity. It's strength in stillness. It's the quiet confidence that says, I can love you and still stay centered. It's emotional maturity expressed through patience and grounded energy. This kind of calm doesn't mean you suppress your emotions or pretend you don't care. It means you feel everything deeply, but don't let those feelings control your actions. It means you're aware of your triggers and choose to respond from presence rather than panic. When you master that, your relationships shift from reactive chaos to conscious connection. The avoidant, who's used to intensity and emotional volatility, begins to trust that your love is safe. They begin to associate you with peace instead of pressure, freedom instead of fear. Invading someone's space, even emotionally, often comes from a place of fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of losing the connection. But when you act from fear, you communicate scarcity. You're saying, I don't trust this love to survive distance. The moment you do that, you validate the avoidant's biggest fear, that closeness comes with demands. Expanding your calm flips that energy. It says, I trust this connection. I trust myself. I trust that love doesn't need to be forced. That trust creates a magnetic pull. It invites the other person to come closer, not because they're being pulled, but because they feel drawn to your steadiness. Emotional boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself grounded. They're what allow you to love without losing yourself. When you push your emotional boundary, you're expanding your ability to stay whole even when someone else is uncertain. You're saying, I can handle your distance without collapsing. I can handle your silence without spiraling. That's powerful because it shifts the emotional dynamic. Instead of being reactive to their avoidance, you become the anchor that allows them to explore connection safely. You become the calm in their storm. And from that calm, trust begins to grow naturally. The avoidant starts to feel something they rarely experience. Permission to be themselves without fear of being consumed. They start to test your calm, sometimes unconsciously. They might pull away to see if you'll chase, to confirm whether your peace is real or conditional. But when you stay steady, when you don't punish, chase, or withdraw in retaliation, you show them a new way of relating. You show them that love can exist without control. And in that realization, their own walls begin to soften. They start to trust that closeness doesn't mean losing themselves. They start to feel safe leaning in, not because they were convinced to, but because your energy invited them. Expanding your calm also transforms you. You start to realize that peace isn't something you get from another person. It's something you create within yourself. You begin to detach from the outcome, not in a cold way, but in an empowered way. You stop measuring love by how much attention you receive and start measuring it by how authentically you can give without fear. You stop needing to fix people and start focusing on embodying the energy that inspires growth in them naturally. That shift changes everything, because love that's born from pressure is unstable, but love that's born from peace is unstoppable. There will be moments when your calm will be tested, moments when silence feels unbearable, when their distance feels personal, when your mind wants to fill in the blanks with stories of rejection. In those moments, your work is to return to your center, to remind yourself that your worth isn't determined by anyone's closeness or distance, to breathe deeply and remember that your calm is your power. The more you practice this, the more your energy stabilizes. The more stable your energy, the safer love feels. That's the paradox. By holding space instead of taking space, you create more connection than chasing ever could. Pushing the boundary isn't about crossing lines. It's about strengthening your capacity to stay grounded in love even when fear arises. It's about replacing anxiety with awareness, control with trust, reaction with presence. When you expand your calm, you become the kind of person who doesn't just attract love, you sustain it because you've learned to meet chaos with peace, uncertainty with patience, distance with understanding. And that's the kind of energy that transforms not just the avoidant, but every relationship you'll ever have. It's the quiet, powerful kind of love that doesn't demand to be felt. It's simply felt by everyone around you. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to like and subscribe.